Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scot McKay.
Gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. I'm your host, Scot McKay. And let me tell you what, gentlemen, if you want the Facebook group that is designed specifically for men like you and I who want to get better with women and actually have a decent time doing it instead of just complaining at each other about their wives and girlfriends and how badly they're being treated by their bosses, et cetera, then the Mountaintop Summit on Facebook is the place for you. We really would love to have you join us there. And also, if you haven't been to mountaintop.podcast.com lately, we got lots of new things there for you too, including downloads, free downloads, and you can always get show notes, see what our guests look like, and all of that right there at mountaintop.podcast.com. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, it's all there. I'm usually at Scot McKay, although on Instagram these days I'm at Real Scot McKay. All right, with me today is a returning guest. He's a good guy, a very smart man, very wise, and his name is Brian Ahearn. The last time he was on a couple years ago, we talked about how to be a man of influence without being a manipulative jerk, and it was a great show. Today we're going to shift gears completely. I don't know. There might be a few common threads in there if you know anything about the content of this book. And after you hear Brian's story about it, you might know what I'm getting at. But today we're going to talk about relationships with fathers and relationships with sons. And yes, we're going to tie that all together with getting better with women. So without anything further, Brian Ahearn, welcome back, man.
Hey, it's awesome to be back, Scot. I listened to that first episode. It was great. I'm sure this one's going to be even better.
Yeah, well, no pressure there. We're going to have to top a really great episode. Right?
I'm up for the challenge.
Right on. Well, you got the ball rolling by writing this amazing book about your father, his time in the Marine Corps, and your relationship with him. And I know we got a lot of military guys out there. We're sponsored by Jocko Willink's company, Origin in Maine. So there's a lot of, so the military motif in general is very strong around this show. And the name of the book is His Story, My Story, Our Story. Now, this is indeed a book about you and about your father. And I'm going to throw the hot potato question on the table right here up front, Brian, because I know you can handle it. Everyone thinks their bio is interesting. Everyone who has anything going on in their life has overcome any adversity, shown any resilience, accomplished anything kind of cool, will have someone who cares about them and is in their corner say to them, hey, you should write a book about this. You should write your biography. Yet, we also know that every time we go to Barnes & Noble, the clearance table is full of legit celebrities' bios that nobody bought. They were self-important enough to think, hey, everybody would like to hear my story. Meanwhile, they didn't sell that well. So indeed, I hear all the time from people who wrote their bio and they think they're so darned interesting. But this one really is a page turner. It really does grab your eyeballs. What makes his story, your story, and your story together, if I can kind of paraphrase the title, such a good read? Why was it such a moral imperative for you to write this book?
Well, I think it's a good read for a number of reasons. First, the dynamic that my father and I had, I think almost any father or son would be able to relate to that. His time in Vietnam, where he wrote extensively. So this isn't just me recounting the history of our family. There's an extensive section that my father wrote about why he went in the Marine Corps, his time in basic training in Vietnam, what he experienced there when he came home. So there's firsthand account. The other thing that's really interesting, Scot, is I don't have to think about, for example, the day that my parents had their final blow up and the screaming and yelling and the breaking of dishes as I'm upstairs in my bedroom. I wrote down exactly what I remembered the next day because I had to keep a journal for school. So there's quite a few literal journal entries from me as a 15-year-old the week later when my father moved out, and I'm trying to figure out how is this going to impact me. Now, a lot of adults don't think, teenagers think about that, but I was thinking about it deeply. How's it going to impact my dedication, my ability to get good grades, working out, the football team? All of these things were ruminating through the mind of a 15-year-old trying to figure this stuff out. So That's why I also say it's our story, because it was impacting me directly. But I think, too, that people are going to find the backdrop of my father's life, being raised Irish Catholic in New York in the 1950s, alcoholic father. There are all these dynamics that people can relate to. So it's not like a celebrity from on high. It's like, hey, here's a guy who's just like me, and here's some of the things that he went through, and here's how he was overcoming it and trying to, quite frankly, better my family by avoiding the mistakes that were made as I was growing up.
So really, if I'm kind of on track with what you're talking about here, which I think I am, it's not even so much one biography as two biographies. It's your story together. It's his story, your story, and our story, literally. But it also has a very redeeming self-help, self-betterment hook to it. And I think that's really important, because as you're talking, I'm ruminating on this whole idea of celebrities and their failed bios, and also considering the ones that are wildly successful, which are few and far between. And the first two that came to mind were Ball 4 by Jim Bouton, who was, a well-known pitcher in the 60s and 70s, but certainly not in the Hall of Fame. And yet his book about his memoirs being a baseball player is a classic and a great read, you guys, if you've never read it. Not so much because of his story, but how he tells it and how he talks about what it's like to be in the professional baseball world at large. And it's wildly entertaining. The other one that came to mind, of course, is, and I say of course because a lot of other guys probably thought of it immediately as well, is the relatively recent biography by Matthew McConoghey called Greenlights, which when you read it, or, I would absolutely recommend doing the audiobook because he narrates it, does Matthew McConaughey. It's not so much about his life, but it's how to be better, how to seize opportunity, how to grow as a person and be your best self through the storyline of funny and interesting things that happen in his life. So it isn't, hey, look at me, look at all this cool stuff I've done and all my accomplishments. You feel like you're a better person and on the road to being motivated to do more, reach more, be more, because Matthew McConaughey himself, and again, this is why the audiobook is so worth it, is telling you you can do this. You can look for these special moments in life that will open doors for you and just go through them like green lights, right? And that's why that book was wildly popular, because it was about us, not so much about him. So your mission in writing this book is to show other people who may have had a rough time of it with their father that, hey, you know what? You're not alone. And second of all, as a father yourself, you can make your own choices about the kind of father you're going to be. And you can indeed make your own choices about the kind of relationship you're going to have and what kind of woman you're going to have those relationships with, right? Am I onto something?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big component of the book. And that's why I dedicated it to our daughter, Abigail, because as I was writing the book and I began to see how history was repeating itself, and I use that phrase a lot in the book, but making conscious choices to say, no, it's going to stop here. I'm not going to lay those burdens on her. There will be enough challenges in life without me adding to them. So my wife and I were very conscious about making different choices. And I really feel like our daughter got the best of both of us and minimized the crummy parts so that she's a better human being. And if I leave this world tomorrow, Scott, I will feel comfortable in the fact that I made it better because our daughter is a better human being than either my wife or I are.
Well, that's always something to aspire to. I don't want them to be that much better because, the larger the gap there, the crappier a person I'm implied to be. So I at least want to keep it kind of close, right?
Well, I talk about this in the book, too, that it's hard, I think, for fathers to pass the mantle to their sons, but it could be as much for women with their daughters. But I want my daughter to be so much more wildly successful in life as a human being than I was. I will feel good about that because I know I had a hand in that. And if she takes that tact with her children, wow, the world's going to be just getting much better all the time. If we all had that same thought process with those little people that we bring into the world and that are going to go out into the world on their own, it would just get better and better instead of as fractured as it happens to be right now.
What's going on there? Why do we have so many broken families, so many broken children, and so many laissez-faire parents, not in the potentially positive way of having free-range children and letting their kids explore as opposed to being helicopter parents or whatever? I mean, I think you know what I mean. Why do we have so many parents who just aren't about the parenting?
I think Dr. Phil might be the better person to ask that question, but I will tell you from my experience with our daughter that we were always extending responsibility to her. And I knew that we were doing it right when she was about to get her license. And she was talking to my mom, her grandmother, and something came up about curfew. And my daughter said to my mom, she goes, "Well, Grandma, I don't have a curfew." And she goes, "You better believe you do." And she goes, "No, really, I don't." And my mom insisted, "You better believe you do." And then Abigail said, "Really, Grandma, I don't have any rules, but I wouldn't do anything to break my parents' trust." And that's where I was like, wow, the fact that she was conscious of we were giving her long leash and she didn't want to ruin that opportunity. And so she made good choices. But that was intentional parenting all the way through.
How did you instill that in her?
I will say from my perspective, it was conversation. From the time she was little, we were involved in father-daughter groups. And then as she got a little older, we did Taekwondo together for many years and camping and different things. But it was so natural for us, Scott, to get in the car and be going somewhere for an hour, maybe up to 4 hours, and to talk. And I treated her like a little human being. I would distill things down that maybe a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old could understand. But we always talked about everything. And I would add to that by saying, as she got older and we would talk about boys or sex or anything, I said, Abigail, you can always come to us and share anything. I would much rather have you come to us because we've lived life and we've experienced it than going to your friends who are still trying to figure it out and getting advice from them. And so she just trusted that. And we didn't break the trust back the other way. And so we had this good symbiotic relationship where we could always be honest with each other.
Yeah, the key word there is trust.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times we as men start off feeling like we have an adversarial relationship with women. We got to keep their hands off our stack. We got to get what we want out of this. We're trying to reel in the biscuit and get them into bed and things like that. And if we're coming from a mindset where we feel like the very women we're going to be co-parenting with someday are on the other side, then what happens when we have kids? What ends up happening, of course, I say of course, it probably isn't obvious to everybody, but it seems perfectly logical to me that if we have an adversarial relationship with women, when we start bearing children, it's going to be us versus them all over again. We got to keep our kids in line. We got to keep them from misbehaving. We got to get them to become the kind of adults we want them to become instead of fostering some sort of independence. I mean, I could go on, but I want to hear what you have to add to that conversation.
Well, the first thing I would say is whatever you want from others, you should be the first to extend it. So if I want trust from my daughter, I should be extending trust first. And then when she sees that I trust her, then she feels comfortable and safe and will trust me. And it was interesting, another quick story in terms of knowing that I had done something right, or I'll say we, my wife and I. When my daughter was still in high school, there was a kid who was in college who was paying attention to her, and I wasn't comfortable with that. And so I told her, we were out for a walk one day, and I said, Abigail, I'm not comfortable with this. I said, when I went off to college, I realized, wow, there are women here, not girls, like in high school, there are women. And I said, the other thing is, I think my friends would have teased me, like, why are you dating a high school girl? And so I shared a little bit of this, and she goes, Dad, I know you don't trust boys, but you have to trust me. And how could I say no to that? I had raised her to be trustworthy, so I had to trust her. And sometimes you hold your breath a little bit. You're hoping that they're going to make what you believe is a right decision. But I knew I had to continue to extend that trust. It would have been terrible if I would have said, I don't care. You're not going to see this individual. That would have broken all the trust and set us back.
Yes. And I think we as parents, we want success. We want prosperity for our children so badly that we almost become these, as dads especially, we become this bull in a china shop, forcing the issue, kind of ham-fisting the whole thing. You're going to make a good decision here if it's the last thing I ever do. And I think it comes from a good place, but it seems really manipulative and overbearing to our children. It seems almost oppressive. And yet you did drop that all-important T word, trust, when you were talking about this dynamic and the right way to get your kids on the right track. I mean, psychologically, certainly, if not behaviorally, by simply leading with trust. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to be a trustworthy parent. How about that? I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. I'm going to make good decisions on your behalf. And I'm not going to be the kind of parent you dread becoming like someday so that you're more likely to rebel. And I'm certainly, here's another important factor, I believe, and I'd love for you to talk about this some more. I'm certainly not going to shame you or make you feel bad about yourself or intentionally harm your self-esteem just to make myself look good or to make sure I quote unquote win this argument. I'm going to believe in you as my daughter, as my son. I'm going to foster what it is you want to do that's healthy. I'm going to discourage you from the things that aren't healthy. And with that, the holy grail of parenting is indeed what your daughter said, which is, I wouldn't want to do anything to break my parents' heart. You know, the male version of that would be a son saying, I don't want to do anything to disappoint my parents because that would suck. I want my parents to be proud of me because they are proud of me and I'm proud of them. So shouldn't we all have this positive mindset towards each other in perpetuity? It's a lot to ask of a preteen. I mean, you know, all of us who have had sons between, say, 9 and 12 are very, very familiar with their knucklehead stage, where they just make unbelievably, unthinkably bad decisions, even, you know, when washing dishes in the kitchen. And, you know, our daughters tend to go through this independent stage where they want to be sassy with everybody, sometime between 12 and 14 years old. And I think we have to live with that to some degree. But I mean, it is hard not to shame them. It's hard not to respond in anger to them when they're going through those stages. But a modicum of temperance goes a long way on the part of a parent, right?
Yeah. And I will say, too, I was still firm with Abigail, you know, when she was in that like 12 to 14 stage that you described. And
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I came home and I said we were involved with Taekwondo, and I asked her something and she gave me some kind of snotty reply. And then I said, well, we're going to Taekwondo. And she made another snotty reply. And I said, well, just for that, now we absolutely are. And I told her, you know, one, I'm not going to put up with that. But two, when you're not feeling good, when you're kind of down, one of the best things you can do is get up and move. And so we're going to go and we're going to work out. When we get to the Taekwondo studio and we're lined up, we're getting ready to stretch, the master of the school is walking by and he looks at her and he goes, who peed in your cornflakes today? And she just pointed at me because she was so angry that I made her go. But Scott, when we drove home and she's laughing and we're having a really fun time, I said, now, Abigail, be honest with me. Wasn't I right? She goes, yeah, you were. She hated to admit it, but that lesson of get up and move can change your state. She needed to hear. And I wasn't going to put up with a teenager who just sassed back at me. There was going to be some kind of reprimand. And for me, it's never hitting or grounding, things like that. It was, nope, we're going to go over to Taekwondo, which nice thing about that, too, was we could legally hit each other.
Now, not to be missed here, I have to underscore the simple fact you are raising a gritty daughter in this scenario, not some shrinking violet.
Absolutely. She is one of the sweetest, kindest people that you would ever meet. So you'd be taken back by her grittiness. I'll share another story here, too. This goes back to, I think, parenting and giving your children confidence. When she was, I think, 12 years old, she had to go to some camp with her school. She went to a small Christian school. And my wife told me the story firsthand. She went as a chaperone. So they go to this camp, and one of the rules they had around meals was if you get seconds and don't finish your food, the whole table has to stand up and sing. Her table didn't finish all the food, so the counselors made them stand up and sing. And a counselor noticed that she wasn't singing. Abigail wasn't. So she let everybody sit down and said, you need to stand up and sing. She was trying to shame her. And my daughter said, well, I don't like to sing. And she goes, I'm going to get you to sing. And so this battle of wills started taking place. And it got uncomfortable. Her friends all stood up and said, we'll sing with you. And she said, no, I'm not going to. And she didn't back down. My wife said she was a little bit embarrassed because there's your daughter kind of defying authority. But when she got home, we were going somewhere and I said, Abigail, Mom told me what happened at camp. And she said, yeah. And I think she thought she was going to get in trouble. And I said, I'm really proud of you. And she said, why? And I said, because you need to learn to say no. Otherwise, people will take advantage of you in life. And so I'm proud that you stood up for what you believed. You didn't want to sing and you didn't sing. I said, but here's the challenge. There will be times when people have the right to ask you to do something. And if you say no, you will pay the consequence. So choose wisely. And I think it was things like that that gave her the confidence that I can stand up for myself.
Yeah, there are a lot of life lessons in there. You know, I can just picture her having this kind of chocolate war standoff if you were forced to read that book back in like 5th grade, you know, where the kid in the book just refuses to participate in the fundraiser where they're selling chocolates. And the teacher calls the inventory every morning. How many chocolates have you sold? And the kid just says no every morning because the answer is still no, I'm not going to sell chocolates. It's actually a pretty good book. It's a little more complex than I'm making it out to be. And, of course, this goes back to my junior high years when I read it. But it's the first thing I thought about because it's an ostensibly obstinate teenager and how authority tries to wrestle them into line to do what they want them to do their bidding. And the kid just won't do it. And there are consequences. And you do have to choose wisely. I think there's a great life lesson there.
Yeah. Well, I think, too, that when you said like wrestling the kid to do what you want, I've always said it's easier to swim with the wave than against it.
You bet.
And when you begin to understand what the natural tendencies of your children are, and you play to those tendencies, you try to minimize the things that are negative, but you give them a sense of confidence that it's okay, the choices that they're making. Our daughter made a lot of choices we wish she would have done differently. And sometimes, truthfully, it was just for us as parents. As an example, she didn't enjoy high school. So when she graduated, we were talking about graduation and planning a party. She said, I'm not going through graduation. We're like, what? You have to. You got to walk across the stage, cap and gown. And she said, I never wanted to be there. I'm not going to spend 3 more hours. And my wife and I talked about it. We said, you know what? We raised her to make decisions. We cannot force her to do this for us. So we relented. We said, okay. We still had a party. We had a great time. It was wonderful. And she, again, felt confident that she made a decision and she had the backing of her parents. Now she's an adult. And so she has the confidence, not that I'm going to be backing her up if she makes a decision about her job. She's got to make that. But she has the confidence because she had all these years of doing it and seeing that she could do it.
Yeah, you know, you do have to pick your battles wisely, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, you say no to the wrong person just because you're self-confident or maybe arrogant, you end up paying a price. And even if you make the right choice, you may still pay a price, but you can at least feel good about the fact that, hey, I stood up for what I believed in.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that comes to mind listening to you talk at length about how parenting works in your family is that there's a bigger overarching issue here that may rule over the parenting and being a kid in a family, and that's what's the whole overall vibe of how this family operates. What are the values that we all subscribe to in this family? And that comes back again to how are the parents leading. But certainly in our family, my wife and I actually do like each other. We're not in an adversarial position. We're best friends. We don't insult each other because, first of all, we don't want to. And so that gets passed down to our kids. We don't insult our children. We actually do like our children. And I'm going to acknowledge some children aren't likable, even by their own parents. And I am so glad we're not saddled with that. But I do know of children who are extremely hard to like, and you can't blame it only on parenting, and the parents are kind of at wit's end over that. They still love their kids. Their kids just aren't easy to like. We have likable children. Our kids are very different. We have 4 of them. All 4 of them are very different. 2 of them are all growed up, as they say in Texas, and out of the house. The other 2 are siblings within 4 years of each other. And it's amazing how they'll bicker, but they don't ever say, I wish you were never born. I can't stand you. They don't drop insults on each other. We actually say, I like you in this family, along with I love you. We appreciate what others do. We say please and thank you. Everybody pitches in. Nobody's allowed to be a slacker and not take out the trash or do the Dishes. I mean, if you don't do the dishes and you're a kid in this house, basically you're not going to eat the dinner we cooked for you. There's a give and there's a take, because that's a life lesson you got to learn. And it works out pretty well. I mean, we have moments. Sometimes people have had enough. Sometimes it's one person's turn to vent or get angry or be unreasonable, and the rest of us wait it out. And then there's usually an apology. And it's not a utopia where everything's perfect and nothing bad ever happens to us. But I'll tell you, when there are challenges we face as a family, we are facing them together. And not to be missed, I am still dad, and the buck still stops on my desk, and I better make a decision. But it has to be in the best interest of everybody else. And because it typically is, I've earned the, wait for it, trust of the family. Now, this isn't all to pat myself on the back. To be honest with you, Brian, being completely immersed in social skills and being better as a man and masculinity and what that means, and of course the quality of relationships between men and women, I darn Skippy better hold down the fort around here because I'm immersed in it all day. You know, I got to be an example, or what good am I? I'm a big old hypocrite. But I do think everything we're talking about here is greatly influenced by masculine leadership at the head of the household, hence the importance of the nuclear family. So talk about that some.
Well, I will say that in growing up in my house, and it was very dysfunctional. Obviously, my parents ended up getting divorced. There was physical abuse. There was verbal abuse. So it was not good. Although I will say the person who edited the book, as she was reading through it, she said, you know, your dad was a shit husband, but he seemed like he was trying to be a good father. And I took away a lot of things that, upon reflection, as I think about who I am and how I operate, I have to give a ton of credit to my dad for discipline and things that he taught me that came from his Marine background that have immensely helped me in my business and in life. There were a lot of negative things too. My dad was certainly a manly man. There was no doubt about that. I won't say that I was as over the top, but I certainly was the head of our household. But the thing is that in terms of sharing faith and values, my wife was happy to do that because she trusted me to make those decisions. We still talk about them. And it's not like I'm just saying we're moving or we're painting the house or whatever. We talk about those things together, but she does turn to me and has confidence in me because of my faith and my values that any decision I'm going to make is not just for me, it's for us, it's for our family. And our daughter had the opportunity to see that growing up. And so that's how she is expecting things will operate in her marriage, because our kids see, hear, and notice things far more than we realize. And people who throw their hands up and think like, oh, kids these days, you know, they're just going to do what they're going to do. That's not true. But you have to start early. And the earlier you start, that just becomes how you live life. And if I go back to what I said about our daughter and our communication, when her friends would say, you actually talk to your parents about that stuff? She was like, why wouldn't I? Because that was just natural for her.
Yeah, well, the reason why she wouldn't would theoretically be because she feels shamed in doing so. If there's no shame, if there's no embarrassment, if there's not going to be any carrot and stick tactic involved with me being invited by my parents to share with me, but when I actually do share something, I get clobbered for it, you know, there's not going to be any shame. There's not going to be any guilt. I think it's also sometimes good for parents to be a little vulnerable. You know, it wasn't like I was this absolute perfect, virginal, mistake-free human my entire life as far as you're concerned, because I wouldn't dare show any weakness to you. And, you know, not like dads are ever like that, right? No apologies. I'm not ever going to tell you I love you because that would be weak. I'm not going to apologize for anything because I didn't do nothing. And, you know, that just puts kids in a terrible position. It paints them in a corner of, my goodness, I'm a horrible person and my parents can do no wrong. I know in my house, my parents never cursed at all. And I knew even as a first grader, come on. I know my dad's in the business world. There's no way that he doesn't ever drop an F-bomb or say anything, you know, untoward ever. I just said they're fronting our whole childhood. They're acting like they'll never say a curse word, never talk about sex, anything like that. I know they do when it's not around us. And my parents are wonderful people. They raised us all right. My two sibs and I, you know, we all turned out pretty well. Very well, actually. and they're great grandparents. My dad writes silly poetry for children and is just a delight. And my mom, of course, is as well. But weirdly, in this family, we are a little gritty with our language, and that could raise a few eyebrows. But we're in Texas, and it all started when my daughter was a 5-year-old nationally ranked BMX racer and a girl, and would get up there on the gate when the parents weren't around. And these little kids, whose parents give them mohawks to go off to first grade with, right? These kind of parents would just start dropping F-bombs on my kid. You're effing slow. I'm going to beat the S-bomb out of you. These are 5-year-old little boys. And my daughter said, well, what does that mean? And one of the kids shamed her back, the manipulative little bastard. He said, oh, I'm going to tell your dad you said that, right? Mm-hmm. And then she comes to me in tears, right? Because I'm her coach in this sport, basically, and said, here's what these boys did. And I took her by the shoulders, got down on one knee, and I looked her in the eye, and I said, from now on, whatever those little boys say to you, you can say right back to them. Okay? And she goes, but they said I get in trouble. You're not going to get in trouble with me. You get up there and don't let them shame you. Don't let them talk at you like that. You stand up for yourself. And that little boy up there who had like a 341 on his plate or whatever, I said, the next time he tells you how slow you are and drops all these bombs on you and that, you're going to get in trouble and all this crazy stuff, just say, what's that number on your number plate? And then when he doesn't answer you, look down at the number 1, because she was state champion. Look down at the number 1 on your plate and go, oh, okay. Looks like I'm the champion here. Who's slow now? And she was 5 or 6, and she got this big, her face just exploded in delight. And it wasn't evil delight. It was vindication. A little 6-year-old, right? 5, 6-year-old little girl. She had to have been 6, come to think of it. And it was never a problem again. Now, the collateral damage was sometimes they would drop a bomb because, her brother wanted in on this party too. But, we don't talk it appropriately in this house about anything. But, the kids can say gritty things at a young age because it was do or die. It was survival. It was cutthroat sports. They had to. And again, it raises eyebrows, but my kids are turning out pretty well. They know how to be appropriate. Everybody always comments on how polite and well-behaved they are in public. But, they're not shrinking violets either. They can stand up for themselves.
Well, when it comes to the language, I can have a foul mouth. If I'm working on something and I come in the house, my wife might go, oh, must have gone pretty good. I heard you talking to God a lot. And so it wasn't this, hard and fast rule, but I will give an example where my wife and I and our daughter, we were having dinner one night and we were talking about an issue and my wife and I saw it differently. And she was much more invested in it than I was. She just all of a sudden blew up. She goes, F you. And she just stormed out of the dining room. And my daughter's eyes were wide. And we sat there for a moment. And I said, Abigail, come in the kitchen. You need to learn how to apologize and try to make things better. And so we kind of hashed things out. And then Abigail and I got in the car and we went to Taekwondo. And so I asked her, I said, what do you think about what happened there? And she had an opinion. And so she started to share what she thought about that. We can't have these things happen and think that our kids aren't noticing or that they don't have an opinion. They do. And so why not talk about it and get their opinion? Was I in the right, or was Jane in the right in this, or what did they think? But she got to see it modeled that, yes, people get angry and they can blow up, but the sooner you try to make it better, the better it is. And by the time we got back from Taekwondo, my wife said, I'm really sorry. And everything was cool the rest of the night. And she got to see, wow, this is how you resolve things.
And, that trust factor allows you to have room to bicker and to get upset with each other and blow off a little steam because, it isn't going to have any lasting damaging results because, you love each other. You even actually like each other. Someone's just having a moment. It's all good. And when that meltdown moment is still devoid of insults or saying anything we'd actually really regret because that habit's been instilled, well, people tend to get over it. It's all about trust once again.
Yeah, I think I don't think most of us really understand why we do the vast majority of the things that we do. And I'll give an example, and this is in the book, where When I was 17, a junior in high school, and I was in the library, and the librarian, I was talking to somebody and she told me to be quiet. And of course, 17 years old, I had to kind of defend myself. And she came right back with, yesterday, that's all you did was talk. And I defended myself more. I said, well, I was talking to Mr. Bash, a teacher. And she goes, if you don't like it, leave. So I stood up and I go, fine, I don't give a damn. I'm going to get the hell out of here. Loud enough for everybody to hear. I stormed out. Well, she went out another door. She got a hold of me and dragged me to an office, and to her credit, gave me every opportunity to apologize. But I was so angry, I wasn't going to. Now, Scott, if you or anybody had told me, hey, I think this has to do with what's going on at home and your parents, I would have said, the hell it does. She's just a bitch. And I would have just went off. Now, older, I know it had everything to do with that. But I couldn't connect those dots at that age. And there's a lot of people who never learned to connect the dots. For me, I took that as an opportunity to teach my daughter. I told her from the time she was a young age, I would tell her about that story just so that she would have some grace for kids who might be doing things and not know why they're doing those things. Even as adults still, sometimes I don't know why I get so upset about something, or sometimes if I talk about my father, I get really emotional. There doesn't seem to be rhyme or reason. So it's worthwhile to have some introspection to try to understand ourselves, because a lot of those behaviors are negative and they can really be harmful. Even if you don't mean anything, they can be really harmful to the people around you.
Yeah, as you're talking, I realize we're setting a pretty high bar in this conversation and painting ourselves out to be pretty darn good fathers who don't make a whole lot of mistakes. And I want to be the first to admit, you will probably not ever see the complete guide to parenting from Scott and Emily McKay, because we're not really the world-class experts on it for sure. I have composed a little audio program for guys on how to talk to their sons about women and sex at an early age, which is indispensable for a lot of guys, especially if their fathers never really taught them that stuff and they suffered through their whole junior high and high school years not knowing what to do. That's a little different because I'm a dating and relationship coach. But man, I am so not a perfect father. And there are all these situations where there's a whole lot of gray area, and you're not going to get it right all the time. And I think forgiveness, and indeed a father saying, hey, I apologize when he needs to, is not weakness, but it is strength. Mm-hmm. And we as men need to understand we can't impose perfection on ourselves, and we can't pretend everything was perfect when it's not, or when we've hurt someone or shamed someone in our household because we wish we hadn't. We got to make it right.
Well, I think, too, even not being perfect, if you've built that base, though, that is good and it's loving and there's trust. So when I go back and talk to my daughter, who, again, is 28, and like, Abigail, if we had it to do over, what should we have done differently? And she says, nothing. She goes, I had a great life, and I loved growing up with you guys. She'll point out things that I might have said or done that made her cry as she was growing up, where maybe I hurt her feelings because I got really angry, like she spilled the milk or some things like that. So by no means was it perfect, but she is now an adult. And so she can look back on things and realize, you know what, the good so far outweighed the bad. And especially as she looks at how other people grew up or what went on in their homes. It's not about being perfect, but it's about being as good as you can be. And when you do make those mistakes, you apologize. And it's amazing how all of a sudden those things don't matter so much because you're continuing to move forward in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like if kids see parents who are never human and never are allowed to make a mistake or make an error, then they just feel a whole lot of pressure as kids to perform. Mm-hmm. And that's not reasonable. Last question before we close, and I think this is the clincher. You've written this book, His Story, My Story, Our Story. What is it you want the reader to take away having read that book?
I hope that they can relate to what we went through. But what the big takeaway, I think, for me would be faith, grace, reconciliation. Because of my faith, I was able to extend grace and forgiveness to my father. And at the time of his passing in September of 2020, we had a really good relationship. The only things that would have been unsaid, I would have liked to have talked to him more about his time in Vietnam and a few other things. But when he passed, I wasn't feeling like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have said this. I wish I would have done that. In fact, 2 weeks before his passing, he sent me a text and said, "Hey, by the way, I found that letter you sent me on my 70th birthday. It brought tears to my eyes." And he talked about, "I've lived a long life and I'm happy." And he had no idea. He wasn't sick or anything. So his passing was unexpected. I had to go back and find that letter. I didn't even remember writing it, but it meant the world to him. And to know that he read that in his last weeks of life and was thinking about, the good things in his life meant the world to me. So that would be it. It would be faith, grace, forgiveness, and I think that can lead to reconciliation.
Man, that's wonderful. His name is Brian Ahearn. When you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon, you're going to find his book, His Story, My Story, Our Story, right at the top of the queue on that Amazon storefront, amongst the other books written by our illustrious guests over the years. But his is right at the top right now when you go there. mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon. Also, when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/story, believe it or not, that URL hadn't been taken yet. You get it, Brian. mountaintoppodcast.com/story, you will be magically teleported to Brian Ahearn's site. What will they find when they go there, Brian?
They're going to see a number of testimonials from various Marines, including a four-star general who wrote the foreword for the book. They'll learn a little bit about me and some of the things that I do and a little bit more about the book. There are also links there to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, etc., so people can pre-order from the website as well.
Man, sounds fantastic. I have a copy of it. It is a page-turner, like I said. Brian, what a great show. This took a whole lot of unexpected twists and turns, which I know I say sometimes, but only when appropriate. What a fantastic show. Thank you so much for returning, and hope you will again sooner than a couple years from now.
Hey, anytime. I enjoy talking with you, Scott.
Yeah, man, good conversations. And gentlemen, be sure you head on over to mountaintoppodcast.com. Check in with the master classes. We do one every month on a topic that is near and dear to the hearts of men who want to get better with women. You can see the whole catalog of those when you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/masterclass, or you can click on the link at mountaintoppodcast.com and check them out that way. Also, I'm here for you guys if you want to talk about where you are right now in your life with women, want to get better with women, whether we put together a plan of action that involves a coaching program for you with me or not, no worries. I always love talking to you guys and keeping my finger on the pulse of what's important to you guys. You can get on my calendar for 25 minutes free when you click on the big red button in the upper right-hand corner of the site at mountaintoppodcast.com. Also, check out our sponsors, Jocko Willink's company, Origin in Maine, The Keyport, also Hero Soap. Great manly stuff for men. Everything you get from any of our sponsors is going to enhance your life in a way that every man should have the opportunity to have it enhanced. Please, when you order from any of our three fine sponsors, use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 with your purchase to get an extra 10% off. All of that and more is there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. And until I talk to you again real soon, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.